Opening credits. Shift Quickie. Shapeshifter Billionaire Romance. By Selena Coffey. Auto-narrated using Google technology. Chapter 1. Okay, Ella, tell me what you think of this, I said to my roommate as I read the job advertisement out loud. Marketing firm seeks excited, hip, hard-working millennial with a bachelor's degree in communications or English, eager to help launch a social media campaign. Must be great at tweeting and using Facebook. Familiarity with WordPress a plus. Ella didn't even look up from her magazine as she said, "You don't tweet. You don't even have a Twitter account." I could learn. You go to bingo night for fun, and you don't ever update your Facebook account. You're practically an old person. I think you should try for a different job. Hey, I said, tossing a pillow at her. What? She said, finally looking up at me after she easily dodged the pillow. She didn't even have the grace to look particularly concerned that she had offended me. Just because I enjoy bingo doesn't make me an old person, I said moodily. Sorry, she said with a shrug, looking back at the magazine now in her lap. I'm going to apply. The worst they can tell me is no, right? Ella didn't answer. Hello? Are you even listening? Turning the page of her magazine lazily, she said, Nope. Not listening at all. I tried not to get upset at her careless words. Ella was just an abrasive person, and I knew I shouldn't take it personally, but it was close to the holidays and I was missing home. And it pained me that in a city so big, the closest person I had to a friend was Ella, who pretty much spent most of her time wishing she didn't have to have a roommate. Needless to say, she was a complete joker most days, but I thought my sunny disposition would at least rub off on her a little. I had been wrong. If anything, my cheerful personality made her even more inclined to either ignore me or treat me like last week's leftovers. Feeling like crap and not wanting my homesickness to get me down, I got up and told Ella that I was going out. She didn't respond, and so I just shrugged and left. I had the annoying habit of wanting everyone's approval, and I needed people to like me. I couldn't help it. I was a people pleaser to no end. People in the small town I was from had found it endearing. In New York, it was just seen as a weakness. As I walked down the street, I thought of how much I missed my grandmother back home. Maybe moving all the way to New York wasn't the best idea, I thought for probably the 7th time that week. I took my cell phone out of my pocket and called my grandmother. She had raised me after my parents had died, and I needed to hear a friendly voice. I was beginning to feel like a loser. I was a cashier at a grocery store, although I had graduated with honors from a prestigious college in Connecticut just last year. I hadn't been able to land a job in my field, and I now figured maybe the world hadn't needed any more communications majors. Add that to the fact that I didn't have any friends, and I felt that I was pretty much losing at life thus far. To my surprise, my grandmother didn't answer. I stared at the phone and decided to call again. I was instantly concerned since she always answered when I called. She had suffered a stroke right before my college graduation, and although the doctor said that for the most part she had made a full recovery, the idea that a stroke could happen to her again at any time filled me with dread. So much so, in fact, that I had put my plans to move to New York on hold until she was better. Hi kiddo, my grandmother said, immediately answering the second time I called. Hi Grandma, I said with relief, smiling at the sound of her voice. Uh-oh, what's wrong? Everything. Nothing. No, just about everything. So which one is it? Everything or nothing? Everything, I said with a sigh. Don't worry about it, sweetie. I'm sure whatever it is will work itself out. I got my undying optimism from her, or as Ella would call it, my annoyingly positive outlook on life. Ella was right about that. After my parents had died, Grandmother had given me time and space to grieve, but she hadn't allowed me to wallow in sadness. That had been 10 years ago, but I could still hear her words in my ear, telling me that life was for the living and that my parents wouldn't want me to stop loving life just because they were gone. I had known she was right, so after their deaths I had vowed that I would live my life to the fullest. And so when I got older, I had taken more risks, been the first in my small town to try new things. And I kept my attitude positive, always hoping for the best, even when life's problems seemed insurmountable. "What's going on? Are you heading out somewhere?" I noticed that when she'd answered, she'd sounded harried. My grandmother took a while to answer, and I briefly wondered if maybe she had accidentally hung up when suddenly she said with obvious reluctance to share, "Well, you remember Mr. Davis, right? From the warehouse?" I asked. Since I could remember, my grandmother volunteered weekly at a warehouse that distributed food to needy families throughout the county. My parents and I would help her during the holiday season, and I remembered Mr. Davis fondly. He was a tall, older gentleman who had at one point been a priest before he started working as a social services coordinator for the small county where we lived. "Yes, well, he asked me out on a date." "What?" I said, smiling widely and picturing my grandmother blushing. "You're going out on a date? That's great," I said, really meaning it. She hadn't dated anyone at all, as far as I could remember growing up, and my grandfather hadn't been in the picture my entire life. "I know, I have an appointment at the salon and I think I'll skip over to the mall to buy a new dress. I'm so nervous. I haven't been on a date in over 30 years. I don't know what to expect." I tried researching what to do on the internet, but mostly that just served to frighten me. I laughed. Dating in the 21st century is scary. Trust me. I once went out with a guy who insisted I call him Peter Pan, and tried to get me to. Never mind. You can imagine how that date went. I could hear my grandmother laughing on the other end, and I smiled, feeling better than I had minutes before. "Well, enjoy yourself tonight, and tell Mr. Davis that I said hello." "Will do. Wish me luck." "You don't need luck. You're hot." She began to laugh so hard, she started to wheeze. I snickered and reluctantly, I let her go. I tried hard to not think about how my grandmother was able to find a date in our small town, but I was in a city surrounded by millions of men, yet I hadn't met one guy who was genuinely interested in me. I had a suspicion that the guy who had wanted me to call him Peter Pan had been on drugs, especially when he asked me if I'd ever gotten high on a roof.
Censored.
Before. I had thought he was joking, until he asked me if I were interested in trying it right then and there. I had pretended to have to use the bathroom, and had excused myself and walked right out the back exit. Sadly, Peter had been the only guy to ask me out in the past 6 months. I didn't think it was because I wasn't attractive. For the most part, I took pretty good care of myself. I walked everywhere and did some ab work when I felt my pants were fitting a little tightly. I had plain brown hair and green eyes, which I thought were my best features. I thought I was moderately good looking, but given that I was in New York where supermodels casually walk down the street as if it were a catwalk, I knew I was probably well below average when it came to New York standards. Not that I was looking for a relationship. I was still too busy trying to establish my career to think about a relationship, but some sort of companionship would have been nice. I shook my head. Something had to give soon, or I would find myself back in small-town Texas without a penny to my name, and nothing to show for all the hard work I'd put into earning my degree. I wasn't interested in returning to my apartment, so instead, I went to a coffee shop not too far from where my apartment was located. I sat down and ordered a small cup of coffee, and just sat there enjoying doing nothing. I had a 10-hour shift later on that day, and I wasn't looking forward to it. The thought of the smell of the grocery store was enough to make me start looking for jobs again, and I used my phone to scan the job ads online. I came across a non-paying job at an animal shelter, but it was an internship in their communications department. I applied with one click, and continued looking for anything that sounded even remotely related to my field. Soon enough, it was time for me to head to work, and so with reluctance I stood up and headed back to my apartment to change. Chapter 2. Ivy? Ivy Smith? Asked the young woman in front of me expectantly. She was a short, curvy redhead wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I looked down at my own attire and felt instantly overdressed. I was wearing black dress pants and a baby blue cashmere sweater that my grandmother had given me 3 Christmases ago. I was just happy that I hadn't worn heels and had instead elected to wear slip-on style ballet flats. I smiled at her and extended my hand. Yes, thanks so much for the opportunity to come in today. You must be Liz? She nodded and shook my hand briefly, inspecting what I was wearing. I probably should have told you over the phone that I thought your first day here you could just get familiar with the animals and what we do here at the facility. Oh well, these clothes are old anyway. It's no big deal. I lied. The pants had been an expensive gift, too, from my grandmother. It was part of a 2-piece interview suit she had given me as a graduation present. Liz shrugged. Well, good. Let's get started. She took me on a tour of the facilities that was divided by a long hallway. The bigger dogs were in the back, and then down the hall were the cats. Smaller dogs were in pens on the opposite side of the cats. I had an affinity for big dogs, even though I'd never owned a dog growing up. There was one that looked like some sort of hound dog. He was tall, dark brown, and had large floppy ears. Despite my wardrobe, I couldn't help but want to hug him, so I climbed into his pen and did exactly that. He surprised me by standing up on his back paws and hugging me back. That's Cola, Liz said, rubbing his ears. He's a favorite among the volunteers. I can see why, I replied, extracting myself from Cola's embrace. Mind if I take him for a walk? I asked impulsively. Are you kidding? He would love that. And so I found a leash and took Cola around the grounds and then on a brief jaunt around the city. Although my internship hadn't technically started yet, I was excited about it. It didn't pay, but I would gain valuable experience to put on my resume, and I would also get to spend time with Cola. Overall, I felt it was a win-win. As we made our way back to the facility, I saw a stretch limo out front and a man climbed out of it. He was talking on his cell phone, but apparently he wasn't very engaged in the conversation. Instead, he was studying the shelter as if trying to make a decision about something. I studied him as he looked elsewhere, marveling at how good-looking he was. He was tall, stocky, with long jet black hair that reached his shoulders. He was wearing a business suit, but the tie around his neck was undone and he had on sunglasses. He began to turn in my direction, when for some reason Cola gave a huge bark and ran in the direction of the man, dragging me behind him. Sit, boy. Stay. Roll over. I yelled, trying all the dog commands I knew with the hope one would make him stop. Apparently none of them worked, as Cola greeted the man by sticking his nose in his crotch. The man abruptly ended his conversation, extracted Cola's nose from his crotch and gave me a long look. I'm assuming the animal who just violated me is yours? I blushed and stammered out an apology when I noticed the corners of his mouth were turned up. He was only joking with me, and I secretly gave a sigh of relief. Part of me feared that he would threaten litigation against the shelter for my inability to control Cola. I've heard of suits for more frivolous things. He's not actually mine, I corrected softly. He's one of the dogs from the shelter. One of the shelter's mongrels? The man said, and part of me didn't like his use of the word mongrel, and I felt myself growing defensive. If by mongrel you mean cute dogs like this one looking for a home, then yes, you're right. Something tells me that this one will be looking for a home for a while here in the city. He's huge. What's the average size of a New York apartment? 700 feet? If you're lucky, I grumbled. Exactly. Well, I'm not going to give up hope. The right owner will come along, I said, feeling a little silly knowing my unshakable optimism was showing again. Ella had said my unrelenting optimism made me seem like a grade schooler. I hoped this man didn't also think I sounded immature. For some reason, I cared about what he thought. I'm not sure if it was because of the limo, or because he just seemed so well put together and had actually spoken to me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I wanted him to not think less of me. I'm guessing you aren't the one then. He removed his sunglasses, and it was then that I saw how oddly colored his eyes were. One was blue and the other was green, both beautiful in their own right. I gulped, immediately finding him even more attractive. I was a sucker for a man with pretty eyes. And he had an equally pretty smile. I found myself moving closer to him, drawn in by an invisible force that I couldn't explain. He had an animal magnetism about him that made me think very unwholesome thoughts about the stranger I suddenly wanted to get to know in a more intimate setting. "The one?" I said, absently petting Cola on the head. "Yeah, you don't plan on adopting him, is what I'm guessing from your comment earlier about finding the right owner for him." "Oh yeah," I said, feeling silly for forgetting my own words used only a few seconds ago. "Nice job coming off as an airhead," I said to myself. I stuck out my hand while making sure I had a fast grip on Cola's leash. "I'm Ivy. I'm an intern in the communications department here." "Ivy? I haven't heard that name in a really long time." "My name's Hollis." "So what is it exactly that you do for the communications department?" he said, looking actually interested. "Well, I haven't actually started yet," I confessed sheepishly, "but I suppose I'll be in charge of their email campaign, general copywriting, the newsletter, things like that." "Then we might see more of each other." His words were innocent, but the suggestive nature of his tone made my mouth dry. "Are you a volunteer or donor, I'm guessing?" I said, looking at the limo to keep from having to meet his eyes. He shook his head. "Neither, and this is my boss's car. I'm too broke to afford a driver." From the expensive cut of his suit, I thought he was exaggerating his lack of disposable income. "Oh, and who's your boss?" "He's inside, actually." "Want to meet him?" I shrugged. "I don't know. I think I should get back to work. I technically haven't even done anything work-related since getting here. Hopefully I don't get fired from a non-paying job for chit-chatting," I said jokingly. He frowned. "You mean this isn't a paid internship?" I shook my head. "Sadly, it isn't." "Are you a trust fund baby or something?" "Excuse me?" I said with a frown. "You know, are you independently wealthy?" "No." "But you're doing an unpaid internship?" I shrugged and admitted, "Well, I have a part-time job at a grocery store. But I need this experience, so I took the opportunity when it was presented. I guess New York's full of communications majors." "Oh, so you went to college?" I found myself offended by his comment, so I replied sharper than I intended. "Yes, I'm a well-educated cashier apparently." He had the good sense to look embarrassed. "Sorry, I wasn't trying to imply that you couldn't have gone to college and still work in a grocery store." Stupid comment on my part. Jobs are hard to come by, and there's a lot of competition here. "I get that." "It's okay," I said, turning away as Cola suddenly lunged forward, dragging me away from Hollis. "I guess I'll see you inside." He jogged ahead and opened the door. "After you, my lady." I smiled back, wondering if he were flirting with me and hoping that I gave off the vibe that I was receptive to his interest, if any were there. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to find out as Liz came towards me looking a little worried. "Sorry that I took so long," I immediately said. "What?" "Oh no, that's not a problem. I'm sure Cola enjoyed the walk. It's just that I was wondering if you would mind helping out with the calls coming in." It wasn't until then that I noticed the increase in activity. "Is something going on?" She nodded. "It's the shelter's 15th anniversary, and the family who started it sent someone, a member of their family, to help with the publicity shot for this year's ads." "Oh, so someone from the Youngblood family is actually here?" "Yep. And he's pretty hot. You have to come meet him." I touched my hair, happy that I had dressed up today and hoping that my walk with Cola hadn't knocked any of my hairs out of place. I saw a camera crew and several others circling around a man who I could only describe as model-like, beautiful. He was probably just above 6 feet and wore plain black pants with a turtleneck sweater. Something about the ensemble looked expensive, and the way the clothes fit his well-built body made me think they had been tailored to his muscular form. He was smiling as Liz caught his attention and introduced me to him. He grinned widely and readily extended his hand. I placed my hand in his and instantly wished that I hadn't. I couldn't explain it, but I felt as if a spark ignited in my body when he touched me. I felt my breath quicken and I swallowed hard. His name was Winslow. Winslow Youngblood. He studied me with his gray eyes and said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ivy. Thanks for coming aboard." Actually, I was just telling Ms. Ivy that maybe there was something we could do to be sure she's compensated for her work here, a voice said behind me, and I turned around and found Hollis standing there. The friendliness in his eyes was gone now. And if I didn't know better, I would think he looked as if he were jealous. Jealous of Winslow? That couldn't be. "Explain," Winslow said to Hollis. "The internship is unpaid. We're supporting slave labor now at the shelter?" Winslow asked wryly. Liz blushed. "We don't have the funds." "Consider it done. How's 25 an hour?" "Hollis will see to it," Winslow said nonchalantly, and I realized he still held my hand as I tried to think with him still touching me. I was ashamed to say the heat of his hand was doing things to me that I wouldn't ever admit out loud to anyone, and he didn't seem inclined to let go. I didn't want to be rude and snatch my hand away, but the way Hollis regarded Winslow's hand over mine made me want to remove myself from the situation entirely. The attention of two good-looking men in one day, what were the chances? "I assume you're attending the ball tonight?" Winslow asked me, changing the subject. "What ball?" "The annual Homes for the Holidays ball," Liz explained. "Winslow's family hosts it every year, and the proceeds benefit the shelter, and at least 25% of our animals in the shelter are adopted out through the event." 25%? That's pretty amazing. I then directed my attention back to Winslow. "I would love to go." He smiled broadly and said, "Give Hollis here your information and I'll be sure you get a ticket." Without another word, he turned away and began to chat with Liz and the camera crew. I looked awkwardly at Hollis, who shrugged and gestured for me to follow him. "Looks like you made quite an impression on Winslow." I shrugged no-committedly. Hollis gave me a look as he opened the door to the office for me, and I sat down at a chair across from him. He surprised me when he pulled out his cell phone and said, "What's your number?" "Excuse me?" Was he asking me out? "Winslow asked me to get your contact information, remember? For tonight?" "Oh," I said, and he promptly said, "Why do you sound so disappointed? You didn't think I wanted your number to ask you out or something? Did you?" I immediately blushed and said, "No, you just caught me off guard." He studied me for a long time. Those two disparate colored eyes were clearly judging me, and for some reason I felt guilty as if I had invited Winslow's attention. I had half a mind to say that, when I realized that I didn't owe Hollis an explanation. Crushing my
censored
to please, I said nothing at all and simply began to give Hollis the information he requested. When he had all the information he needed, he got up to leave, and I found myself wondering if I would see him again. "See you tonight," he said simply in parting. And with that, I had my answer. Chapter 3. My phone rang as I spun around in a circle again, trying to see what I looked like from all sides, even though that wasn't possible with the long closet mirror I was using. I craned my neck trying to check out my backside, but I couldn't see much. What I was able to see, I was impressed by. I was actually wearing the dress I'd gotten for the honors ball while in college. Each year, the Dean of Student Development had hosted a ball for high-achieving undergraduate and graduate students. It was like the prom for nerds, but in college instead of high school. I had bought the dress my senior year, so it had only been worn once. It was a strapless black dress that stopped at my ankles, and from the front it was pretty demure. The back, however, was undeniably sexy given that it was practically backless. I had arranged my hair in elegant waves around my bare shoulders, and had gone minimum in my makeup selection, going with a nude lip but heavy on the eyeliner. I thought I looked pretty, and just hoped Hollis or maybe even Winslow also thought so. I slipped my feet into a pair of stilettos and was about to make my way out the door when Ella looked up and said, "Where are you going all dressed up?" "Out," I said simply and disappeared through the door. I thought it would be fun to keep her guessing. It made me feel mysterious and even interesting, two characteristics Ella didn't associate with me. As I made my way down the stairs, I almost collided with the last person I expected to see in my building. "Hollis?" I said, staring at him. He looked handsome in a dark gray tuxedo. His hair was slicked back, and upon seeing me he attempted to whistle, but it fell short. A giggle burst from my throat, and he grinned boyishly at me. "I never learned how to whistle." "Clearly. But you look beautiful. Like an actress going to the Emmys or something." I thanked him for the compliment and said, "What are you doing here?" He looked confused. "I'm your ride." "Really? Are you Winslow's chauffeur?" I asked, hoping my question wasn't too personal. He shook his head. "No, I'm actually his lawyer. So I spend my time keeping him out of trouble." "Then what are you doing here?" "I'm the opposite of trouble. If you looked up boring in the dictionary, you would probably see me." "I have a hard time believing that," he said, offering his hand to me as I navigated the steps, attempting to hold one edge of my dress up so that I could see the stairs. Gratefully, I took Hollis' hand in my own and he surprised me by slightly squeezing my hand. "Are you looking forward to tonight?" he asked me as he led me down the stairs. "I am. I haven't been to something formal and fancy in a long time. Since college." "When was college?" "Like yesterday," he joked. I pretended to be annoyed, although I was far from it. I was enjoying his playfulness this evening. Before I answered him, I snuck another peek at Hollis. I liked how he radiated confidence without coming across as
censored.
"I graduated last year." "So you're really young, 22, 23? I nodded. 23. "You're practically jailbait," he said, shooting me another grin as we approached the town car on the corner. I rolled my eyes and said, "You say that as if you're so old. How old are you?" 28? 29? 30? He said unhappily as he opened the door for me, and I slid inside the warm interior of the car. "You're practically an old man," I joked. He grabbed his heart as if he were hurt, as he slid in next to me. "Most days I feel like one." "Winslow keeps you busy." "You have no idea." "Well, better busy than wasting away at a grocery store saying, 'Clean up on aisle 5, over the loudspeaker every day." He winced. "Don't put yourself down like that. With the right experience and the proper connections, you'll be where you want to be eventually." I sighed wearily and confessed, "I'm not really sure about that." The car pulled off, and I turned to look out the window, embarrassed that I had shared my self-doubt with him. I felt his hand touch my shoulder, and I turned towards him. "If you don't believe in yourself, then you can't blame others for not believing in you too. So cheer up. You're the key to your own success. Be more positive." Key to your own success? Did you read that in a self-help book somewhere? I joked, wanting to believe him, but still finding it hard. Even my unrelenting optimism had its limits. As a matter of fact, I think I did. And I said it to myself, after I was rejected by most of the law schools I applied to. But I stayed positive, and now I'm a lawyer, so apparently it worked. Or you just got a lucky break. He laughed. "You don't say?" "And all these years, I just thought I got into the best law school in the country because I was a semi-genius." "I thought you said you were rejected?" I narrowed my eyes at him. "Oh, I was, by all my safety schools, which made me think I wouldn't get into my top choice, and I did. In fact, that's where I met Winslow. But that loser dropped out his first year." I looked up at him, surprised that he would insult his employer. "Loser?" "I'm just kidding. We were friends before he became my boss. He left school to learn his family's business when his grandfather mentioned he was planning on early retirement." "What's the family business?" I asked. "Real estate. They own quite a chunk of New Jersey." My eyes grew wide, and to my confusion, Hollis' eyes narrowed. Yep. Winslow and his family have plenty of money, if that's what you're interested in. What? I said, confused, and before he could answer, we arrived at our destination. Gone was the light and fun mood from earlier. Hollis was all business as he got out of the car and held the door open for me. Are you trying to imply that I'm some sort of gold digger? I said as I climbed out. Because I'm not. He seemed to be ignoring me as I followed him up the stairs of a historic hotel where I assumed the event was being held. He was walking fast in front of me, and I struggled to keep up with him in my snug-fitting dress and heels. Can you wait up? I called, and he did as I asked, albeit reluctantly. Is this how you are? Someone says something that you don't like, or that you completely misconstrue, and you march off in a huff? You'll have to excuse me. I just don't like to waste my time on women who see dollar signs instead of a person. Oh, stop. You don't even know me. Stop being a judgy McJudgerson. I said, exasperated. Excuse me? He said, turning around finally to look at me. A judgy McJudgerson. You know? A judgmental person. Did you just make that up? No. I read it in a forum. I said, blushing. A forum? Yes. About what? I didn't dare tell him it had been a forum for those of us who struggled to make friends in the big city. I didn't want to sound lame, so instead I made something up, a forum about dogs. You're lying. You're chewing on your bottom lip. No, I'm not, I said, and quickly realized that I had been. He laughed. Never play poker. Whatever, I said, walking away from him. I was so angry that I didn't notice the beauty surrounding me until a second later, and I sucked in a quick breath as I took in the expertly renovated hotel with its high columns and exquisite chandeliers. Impressed yet? A voice said from the side of me, and I was startled to see Winslow standing there. Like Hollis, he wore a tuxedo. His was black, and seemed to be made of some expensive material that I didn't readily recognize. He took my hands in his and studied my figure, letting his eyes slowly take in my body, and then he let go of one of my hands and slowly spun me around. He whispered a soft wow when he saw the skin revealed by the back of the dress, and it was then that I felt Hollis' hand on that exposed skin on the small of my back, and I shook a little. His touch, although unexpected, was delightful. He splayed his fingers, warming my back. I'm sure you have clients you need to greet. I'll take Ms. Ivy off your hands and keep her entertained. After all, what are friends for? Hollis said, walking away with me. I glanced behind me at Winslow, who was greeting another guest, but as he did, he kept his eyes trained on me, and he gave me a slow, knowing smile that made my skin tingle. Hollis cleared his throat, and I tore my eyes from Winslow. What would you like to drink? He asked stiffly. I don't drink. I responded automatically. He shrugged. That's too bad. I'll have something then. He took a glass of champagne off a tray as a waiter passed by. As he took a sip, I took in the room around us. I guess the reception kiosk and lobby area had been gutted, and in its place a ballroom had been created. There were tables on either side of the room, and a runway stretched down the middle. A band played in the back, and people were on the dance floor enjoying themselves. What's the runway for? I asked Hollis curiously. The dogs will be auctioned off as they go up and down the runway. Seriously? I said with a smile. Yep. That's so funny. I had no idea this event would be so. My voice trailed off as I attempted to find the right word. Fun? Yeah, I thought it was going to be boring. To be honest. Well, since it's open to the public, it's actually pretty fun. Open to the public? That's so kind of Winslow and his family. Hollis nodded. Yep, but tickets are $100 each. Ouch. I said, thinking of how much I could do with $100. Tell me about it. But people love it. We sell out each year. The dogs find a great home, and it's for a good cause. Anyway, enough talking. Would you like to dance? I nodded, and he began to lead me to the dance floor when Winslow popped up suddenly. "Hey buddy, my grandfather wants to speak with you. I'll take Ivy off your hands." And before Hollis could refuse, Winslow had me wrapped in his arms as he gently and expertly moved me across the dance floor. "Are you having a good time thus far?" he asked me, staring down into my eyes. His own eyes, with their eerie gray color, made him seem mysterious and slightly nefarious even. I think it was the light gray against his
censored
skin that did it. It was just an unexpected combination. I felt like melting as his hand gently rubbed my spine, tracing his fingers up and down my skin in hypnotic fashion. Yeah. I'm having a great time." I could barely get out a word as I became aroused by the feel of his hand acquainting itself with the delicate skin of my back. He dropped his head towards mine and said, "Do you like that?" I pretended as if I didn't know what he was talking about. "Like what?" "Oh, so you're going to play coy?" he said, and then he shifted my body closer so that my
censored
were pressed against his.
Censored.
I sucked in a breath and he placed his mouth close to my ear. "You look unbelievably sexy tonight." His hands tightened around my waist, making me gasp. "Thank you," I whispered. "No, thank you for this dance. Hopefully later on tonight we'll get better acquainted. Until then, have fun." He then bent down again and placed a
censored
behind my ear, letting his mouth trail down the curve of my neck. He pressed his nose against my neck and inhaled the scent of my skin. I shivered and he chuckled before letting me go. He looked at me ruefully, and then made his way through the crowd, leaving me alone on the dance floor. I looked around but didn't see Hollis anywhere, so I found myself a table and sat down alone. Soon the show started, and I became lost in my own thoughts as I watched dog after dog showcased. I was amazed at how much people were bidding. Several of the bids went into the thousands. I figured Hollis was right. While the event was open to the public, the general public couldn't afford to bid like the individuals here were doing. Eventually, even Cola found a home, and it was bittersweet knowing that I wouldn't see his silly face at the shelter again, but I was happy he had found his forever home. As the evening drew to an end, I stood up to find Hollis. He was nowhere to be found, but I ran into Winslow, who told me he would take me home. I shrugged, wondering where Hollis had gone off to. Less than 5 minutes later, Winslow was escorting me out of the building and down the steps. I felt like Cinderella as I left what seemed to be a dream of a night, followed by my prince, in this case, Winslow, who looked regal as he walked with me. But something about him, the way he touched my back and gently caressed it, seemed possessive, and I tried not to think about it, as the car pulled up to whisk me away from what felt like a dream. Chapter 4. A stretch limo pulled up in front of us, and a driver opened the door. I slid in and Winslow slid in next to me, to my surprise. I had expected that the limo had been called to just take me home, but apparently I was wrong. I hadn't expected Winslow to accompany me. "I trust you had a good time?" he said, looking down at me. I nodded, feeling suddenly shy. I noticed the stubble on his chin, and how it made him look roguish in a sexy way. His eyes studied mine, and then he not so subtly appraised me, allowing his gaze to settle on the exposed skin of my legs. The dress had a split on one side, and apparently Winslow was enjoying the view from where he sat. "So where are you from, Ivy?" "Texas." "Really? That's charming. Are you from a big city like Dallas or Houston?" I shook my head. "A really small town. Honestly, there's like one stoplight, and almost everyone's related." I realized the last part of that statement made my town sound like a breeding ground for incest or something, and I quickly backtracked. "I mean, it's just really small, so everyone feels like family." He smiled and said, "I understand. My grandfather was from a town like that, back in Latvia. He talks about it fondly." It was then that I noticed how his thigh was pressing against my own, and I moved slightly away. "I'm sorry. Am I making you uncomfortable?" "What? No. I just..." "What?" he said, looking into my eyes again in an almost unnerving way. "Nothing," I said softly, and he slowly brought his hand up to stroke the side of my face, allowing his hand to cup my cheek. I wanted to touch you since the first moment I laid eyes on you. I wanted to touch you, everywhere. I didn't know what to say, how to react. I just sat there speechless, feeling myself grow wet at the most innocent of touches. Like your lips, for example, they're so full, so
Censored.
it would be a sin not to.
Censored.
You.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
His eyes were almost a dark gray now, and I figured my eyes were playing tricks on me. I gave him a partial smile and then quickly headed into my building, climbing up the stairs exhausted, my
Censored.
already missing the feel of him. Oh gosh, what have I done? I said to myself as I walked through my apartment door. Well, look who's finally here, Ella said. Don't you look rumpled yet satiated? What were you out doing? She asked in a mocking voice, although her tone and look clearly showed she knew what I had been up to. I caught sight of myself in the mirror and groaned. I didn't bother to answer her. I just walked right past her to my room and closed the door. I stripped out of my dress and fell into a much-needed deep sleep. And what felt like minutes later, I awoke with a start and sat straight up. My heart was beating quickly, and I looked around my room for signs of Hollis or Winslow. But of course, neither of them was there. It was the next morning, and I had obviously slept through my alarm. I guess it was just a dream, I said, falling back on the pillow. I knew if I were to place my hands between my legs, I would find that I was wet. The dream I had been having had been full on.
Censored.
Hollis had been going down on me, and I had been luxuriating in the feel of him when Winslow had appeared from nowhere. And had I actually asked him to join us? The details of my dreams came rushing back to me, and I blushed as if they were real. What was going on with me? I had
Censored.
with a man who was virtually a stranger in the backseat of a limo, and I was dreaming about having a threesome? People from my hometown would think I'd lost my mind. I took comfort in the fact that at least New York was really big, so I wouldn't have to worry about running into either one of them again. I didn't want to run into Hollis because I felt guilty about sleeping with Winslow. And I didn't want to run into Winslow for obvious reasons. I took a long hot shower to clear my head, and then made my way to my shift at the grocery store. The time passed slowly, and I did my job in a fog, not really thinking about what was going on around me, too preoccupied over my decisions from the other night. So when a belligerent customer became testy with me, I was completely caught off guard. I'm sorry, sir, that item isn't eligible for return. It wasn't bought here, I said softly, not wanting to offend him. What do you mean it wasn't bought here? He growled. That brand is for the store down the street. We don't carry that product here. I tried to explain in a friendly manner. Are you calling me a liar? I paid for and bought this here, and I want a refund now. Sir, Shut the hell up. You don't know what you're talking about. Get me your manager. Now be. The rest of his words were cut off by my manager, who appeared from nowhere it seemed. He frowned at the man and said, Sir, what seems to be the problem? Your idiot cashier can't issue a simple return. There's no need for name-calling, Mr. Seymour said promptly, which seemed to only enrage the customer more. Who the hell do you think you are? This is America. You can't tell me how to talk. If I want to call her an idiot, that's my right. Spittle flew out of his mouth as he said it, and I finally noticed that his hands were shaking and his eyes were dilated to a scary point. He was obviously on drugs and irrational, which made him dangerous. I tuned in to what Mr. Seymour was saying. Our store doesn't carry the brand you're attempting to return. You're all a bunch of lying idiots. Nothing but a bunch of thieves taking advantage of the little people. I'm a law-abiding citizen, just trying to make a return, and you accuse me of lying. Just who the hell do you people think you are? Bunch of nobodies. For all you know, I could have a gun in my pocket. I bet if I had a gun, you would respect me. No one respects anyone anymore unless fear makes them. Mr. Seymour drew in a breath, and I instantly froze as the man reached into his pocket and then I saw the security guard, Mr. Lockley, approaching, and he stopped right behind the man and said, "Is there a problem here, sir?" The man withdrew his hand from his pocket, but gave us a long, crazy look before saying, "No." "Then I suggest you leave," the security guard said. The man hesitated and moved his hand from his pocket. To my relief, he held nothing but a cell phone. He looked at me as I visibly relaxed and scowled. "What? You thought I had a gun or something?" "Stupid."
Censored.
Scared of her own shadow. I winced at his words, and he laughed cruelly before Mr. Lockley clamped his hand on the man's shoulder and steered him out. I stood there for a moment still in shock, and my boss said sympathetically, "I'm sorry about that, Ivy. Why don't you take off early? Your shift's almost over anyway. I'll call you a cab." Mr. Seymour was being more than generous, and I appreciated it. The grocery store was only a subway ride away from my apartment, but I was afraid that the crazy customer would be waiting for me outside. My phone rang as I went to the back to get my things. I reached for it automatically. I didn't recognize the number, and then realized it was Hollis' voice. "Hi, sorry I didn't get a chance to say goodbye the other evening, but I was wondering if you wanted to get together later on this weekend." I was caught off guard by his question, and as I went to answer, I heard screaming from behind me just as I disappeared into the boss's office where we ladies kept our purses. Afraid the disgruntled customer had come back, I looked out the blinds that framed the window inside the little office and saw two armed men wearing masks with guns pointed at the customers and Mr. Seymour. The third masked man was chaining the front door. "What the hell is going on in there?" asked Hollis. "We're being robbed." "Oh God, I need to call 9. "What? Where are you?" "Work." I blurted out the address, and then hung up without explanation and called 911, my hands shaking the entire time. I then tried to push the desk up against the office door, hoping that the perpetrators hadn't noticed me, but I realized as the door slammed open that I was way too late. Chapter 5. I heard the gun.
Censored.
And instantly dropped my cell phone. "Who were you calling?" "No one." "Get up," the masked man said calmly. With shaking legs, I did what I was told. He had the gun trained on me when one of his partners came in through the door behind him and said, "Should we get the safe too?" "No time. This one called the police," he said in my direction. I didn't say a word. I was too afraid to speak, and it was then that I heard it. A banging noise that seemed to rattle the entire store. "What's that? Didn't you chain the entrance?" "Probably the cops trying to get in." "Damn it. Let's get out of here. If the cops are there, we're going to need some leverage," the one in front said, as he grabbed me by the hair and dragged me from around the desk. I struggled against his grip, until he slapped me across my face. He dragged me through the store where I saw Mr. Seymour unconscious on the ground. The other cashiers were up against a wall with a few other customers, scared to move as another guy held them at gunpoint. He saw us coming and told everyone not to move, as he walked backwards through the exit with us, never lowering his gun from the crying figures of my coworkers and regular customers. His other partners pushed through the back door and dragged me to what I assumed was the getaway car. There weren't any cops or signs of cops anywhere. But I saw the security guard's body on the ground. He too looked unconscious. I was crying and pleading for them to let me go, when I noticed that the driver was the man who had been the irate customer from earlier. It was then that I understood that it had all been a setup. The driver had staged a fight with me to get the security guard out of the store in order for his partners to rob the store. "Get in the car," yelled one of them, shoving me in the direction of it. "Just let her go. There's no cop. We don't need a hostage." "That just complicates things," said another one. "She can identify me." "She's coming with us," said the driver. I felt sick to my stomach as they attempted to push me into the car, and I began to scream and struggle. No way was I going to get into that car. They would have to kill me first, because I knew getting into that car was certain death. As I kicked, bit, and screamed, I closed my eyes as one blow and then another landed in my stomach, and then someone slapped me across the face. I sucked in a breath, trying to breathe through the pain, and then as I figured I was about to die, I heard one of the robbers say, "Who the hell are you?" I didn't know who that question was addressed to, and I didn't take the time to find out, as chaos erupted and I heard a sickly sound of bone being cracked in half, and then screaming followed by gunshots. I crawled away screaming and crying, so scared my legs weren't working, but still trying to get away, not looking behind me as I tried to escape whatever fate the robbers had found themselves in. I could hear them screaming in fear and pain, and then I heard another gunshot and the roar of what sounded like a wounded animal. I looked back then, and the creature that stood there on its hind legs over the bodies of the 3 men and the driver was like something out of a horror movie. It was built like a bear, but fiercer and more intimidating because its snout and teeth were elongated and bared. Its claws, thick and deadly, showed traces of blood and flesh. It lowered itself on all fours to inspect its handiwork, and then its nose twitched and it caught sight of me. I stared at it and began screaming, thinking that I had lost my mind, willing myself to wake up from what was clearly a nightmare, and then it came walking slowly towards me. My eyes went wide and I screamed, about to faint, when a car appeared from the opposite side of the alley and stopped right next to me. Winslow was behind the wheel, and he climbed out and picked me up and placed me gently in. "Oh my God, Winslow! Get us out of here. That thing killed them. Oh God!" I sobbed. Winslow squeezed my hand and casually stuck his head out of the window and said, "Hollis, hurry up. We don't have all day. The cops are right around the corner." With chattering teeth, I looked up and watched the monster that was in front of us shrink, and its animalistic qualities slowly faded until I was staring at a
censored
man. But not just any
censored
man, it was Hollis. "He's such a show-off," Winslow said, and it was the last thing I remembered before I fainted. "Wake up, Ivy. Come on, wake up," I heard a voice say, and abruptly my eyes flew open. And instantly I began to scream. "It's okay. We got you. Calm down." It was Winslow, and he was stroking my hair. I had on nothing but a man's dress shirt, and I was in a house that I didn't recognize. What's going on? Where am I? "I think I'm going to be sick," I said, grabbing my stomach. "Did you see it, Winslow? That thing. That monster." "Yeah, he's in the other room," Winslow said nonchalantly. I shook my head, not understanding, and began to explain again as if Winslow was the crazy one. "You don't understand. There was a monster. It attacked the robbers. I think that sedative you gave her worked too well," I heard a voice say as Hollis entered the room. "What?" Winslow said, tilting his head and giving Hollis a questioning look. "Ivy's talking about monsters." He came and sat down next to me on the bed. Now Winslow was on my left and Hollis was on my right. "You were there. You saw it, right, Winslow?" I said. He opened his mouth when Hollis
censored
the cops showed up at the same time Winslow and I arrived. "We didn't see anything. Did we, Winslow?" Winslow seemed to hesitate, and then he shrugged. I looked from him to Hollis, feeling as if something was deliberately left unsaid. "The mind plays some weird tricks on a person when they're stressed," Hollis said. I just stared at him and nodded. Yes, I had hallucinated. Clearly that was what happened. The other option was too crazy to believe. I guess I must have imagined it all. It just feels so real. I don't know. They were planning to kill you, and your brain doesn't want to deal with that reality, so it made up a different one," Hollis said softly. He took my hand in his and began to rub it gently. "I'm sorry we didn't get to you sooner." "Did the cops come?" "Don't worry about that," Hollis said shortly, and then he said to Winslow, "Why don't you get Ivy something to drink?" I was unsure why Hollis was ordering Winslow around, but Winslow seemed unperturbed as he did just that, disappearing through the door without another word. Hollis leaned really close to me, and I don't know what happened, but I felt this almost uncontrollable need to get closer to him. I shook and wrapped my arms around myself. I figured I was in shock, or getting over the rush of adrenaline I had felt earlier. Why else was I so turned on, when I should be feeling nothing but remnants of fear?
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
And with that he pulled out and collapsed next to me where I had fallen to the ground, my knees no longer able to hold me up. I felt Winslow picking me up gently and laying me across the bed. And then I felt a blanket cover me, and Hollis' hands caressing the curve of my hip before he
Censored
my ear and said, "Sleep tight, my dear Ivy." Then as I settled into a light sleep, I heard the words, "Maybe we should tell her the truth." After a long pause, Hollis sighed and replied with a simple, "Someday." As the door closed behind them, my brain tried to process the words I'd heard, but my body had had enough and was already giving into sleep. And so I slept, feeling strangely more protected and safe in that moment than I had in my entire life. Read Book 2, Too Hard to Bear now. Download now. Or get 30% off when you buy the next ebook directly from my website. https://payhip.com/b/evmum. Use exclusive discount code BACK4-2 hydrogen boride. About the author. Selina Coffey is a romance writer who lives happily in London with her husband and son. She is a hopeless romantic who grew up always believing in love, and she is not ashamed to admit this. It is this belief that makes her so passionate about writing crazy love stories. A stereotypical girly girl, she loves shopping. So whenever she gets a chance and the spare cash, you will probably find her browsing online for the next pair of shoes to add to her collection. You can find her online at www.selinacoffee.com. Contact her at hello@selinacoffee.com. Closing credits. This has been Shift Quickie. Written by Selina Coffey. Auto-narrated using Google technology. Copyright 2024 by Lovie Books Limited. Production copyright 2024 by Lovie Books Limited.